He made himself ill at Newcastle, with how hard he was working.
Before we move things on to Rafa himself, we can't ignore this process, Greg, that Everton have been through. Out of the blue, Carlo Ancelotti was gone. Tell us how that left Everton and what process then unfolded with some quite remarkable twists, turns and meetings along the way.
You're right, it was remarkable. It was totally unexpected for starters. So, June the 1st, almost in the space of 24 hours, it went from reports in some unheralded Spanish radio outlets to becoming the news that certainly shocked. I'd say, yeah, it did shock football because, as much as the absolute rumour mill on 24/7 that is Real Madrid, I don't think many people could have predicted that Ancelotti was up sticks after such a brief stint at Everton. A job that he talked up wanting to see to some sort of conclusion and go back to the Bernabeu. Okay, understandable in a way, given his history there, but Everton didn't expect it. There'd been no indication it was going to happen. And they were suddenly left right in the thick of yet another managerial search. I mean, this Benitez becomes the fifth manager in 6 seasons. So it's remarkable when you think back to the stability of the David Moyes era. It feels like a bygone era as a manager who was there for 11 years. I think this is the search where Mashiri and Usmanov's influence really told. You might expect the director of football, Marcel Brands, to have had a say. And I think he did in the early shortlist creation, of which Rafa was on it, alongside people like Nuno Espirito Santo, Moyes, who I mentioned earlier, and many others. Fonseca was in there and mentioned, and Christophe Galtier, who since then has gone to join Nice. At one point, it did feel like we were going to appoint Nuno. It really, all the momentum and the signs were suggesting that he was going to become the Everton manager after turning or walking away from Palace. But no, that went quiet. Almost inexplicably, we heard he didn't have the best interview. And that's, you saw Rafa doing 2 Zoom interviews and then going out to the coast of Sardinia. It's all right for some, on Mashiri's super yacht, and having a face-to-face interview. And he obviously talked his way, as George will tell us. I think he's a very, very convincing talker and a man that when you're in his presence, he can convince you that he's got what it takes, and he got the job pretty much from that. But there was one other interesting bit when Mashiri was advised by Usmanov to pick up the phone to Roman Abramovich and just seek his counsel. Obviously, Roman Abramovich controversially gave Rafa the job as interim manager back in 2012 at Chelsea. And I think the glowing reference was provided. And in the end, it was just a case after that. It was just a case of getting the contract negotiation, which took a while, over the line. And the fan protests, in truth, although they were respected by Everton's board, were never going to stand in the way because, like I said at the start, this is the man that they believe can deliver the success that they want.
If you're not already an Athletic subscriber, you can currently take advantage of our best ever offer to celebrate the Euros. Go to theathletic.com/Ask Ornstein to sign up for just £1 or $1 per month for the first 6 months and enjoy all of our Euros and club coverage. Now, before we get back to George and Greg, a question for you guys. Can Benitez make Everton a top 6 club? Let me know in the comments below. Meetings on yachts, calls from Roman Abramovich. This resembles more of a Bond movie. And I've got to say, from what I know of Everton in this situation, there are a lot of politics that we could spend hours talking about. There's a lot of agendas, egos at play, different influences around the most important people at the club, input from various quarters. But the fact remains that Rafa Benitez is the new Everton manager. I think it's a 3-year contract. And that's where I want to bring George in, because George has vast experience of Rafa Benitez from Newcastle throughout his career. And one of the first things that I thought when I heard his name come into the frame was, despite the controversy, and there was some real vile abuse that was sent the way of Rafa Benitez that had no place in any scenario, that I thought to myself, Rafa won't care. Rafa is a football manager and he's very single-minded. He's got a tunnel vision on doing the best possible job wherever he goes. I mean, there wasn't great sentimentality in his statement yesterday. He tried to explain past comments about Everton by just saying whoever he works for, he fights for. And he's going to do the same now. So, George, what did you make of Rafa coming into the frame and now he's got the job? How do you see this unfolding?
Yeah, I should remind people that he was our colleague on the Athletic for a little while too, and and I've kind of got to know him. I've got to know him through that and through his time at Newcastle. I think it's you talk about the politics. I think it's a jeopardy. I think it's a jeopardy all round this, and I think that's one of the things that makes it so sort of interesting from a dramatic theatrical point of view. Almost, I think there's logic. There's a huge logic to it from his perspective, in the sense that he's wanted to stay in the Premier League if at all possible, or to come back to the Premier League if at all possible, because of his family connection. In England, he's wanted to compete, to use one of his favourite words, and that rules out a lot of clubs. And there's always been a sense that if Everton came knocking, that he would consider it, because he is embedded in Merseyside. It's not just a Liverpool thing. His family lived there, his daughters live there, his wife there. So you can't live where he lives and it only be Liverpool. It's the whole region, it's the whole area, and he's always said that. They just haven't come knocking for him in the past. Mm-hmm. So although it's in some ways this has been a straightforward decision, it's not easy. It's not a comfortable decision, because there are people around Rafa who've been saying to him that the chance or there's a possibility that this becomes the worst of both worlds, not the best of both worlds, that you have that relationship with Liverpool, that Liverpool fans to this day will still come up to Rafa and say, you gave us the best day in our lives, and that he puts that sort of memory at risk. And if it doesn't go well at Everton, for Everton, you have that sort of sense that he's only ever going to be 2 games away from all sorts of problems with fans, because there's no hinterland there.
Greg, this is an appointment that is designed to finally, and other incumbents have had this sort of bestowed upon their shoulders before, take Everton to a place where they're competing for honours, which it looked like it might have happened under Carlo Ancelotti when he arrived, but by the end, it was certainly not the case. It
was just unacceptable. And I remember Ancelotti's response when he was asked at the end of the season, can you explain why? And he just said no. And I just remember thinking, well, I think I would expect a bit better. I mean, I praise his honesty, but maybe I expect a bit more. I don't think Rafa will be short on answers for anything. I think this, as George was hinting, and everything I hear about him is that this is a man who's nimble brain, is fizzing at all different angles, and is just an absolute polymath of everything in terms of, I believe he can expound on the NHS and give you a detailed theory of why the vaccine rollout could be better, while he's also juggling the merits of a Belgian Jupiler League team. I really do think there's someone who's so immersed in football in a way that Ancelotti obviously has been, but I don't think you say laissez-faire, a light touch manager. Ancelotti probably wasn't the type to be at the training ground till sunset. I think Rafa is. Yes, I think they share that pragmatism tactically, but people have already, some of the digs, some Liverpool fans have started, get used to the football, won't be great to watch. Well, I think that, it's a little bit of one-upmanship. They probably would also accept that at times when Liverpool, finished runners-up in the Premier League, and when they had that fantastic team with Mascherano and Torres and Houpier and some tremendous players, Pepe Reina and obviously Gerrard, that they played some fantastic football. He needs to add to the squad at Everton, and you will be back to your right. And then I think that there's absolutely no reason why you can't have them playing entertaining football, and he'll be respectful and understanding of what Goodison wants and how to respond to the crowd, but more importantly winning football, and that's what Moshiri and ultimately the fans want.
A couple of little things about that sort of sense of detail that he has. So I went away when Dalian, his Chinese team, were doing a pre-season that lasted for about 8 months, as it turned out, or longer because of the pandemic. I think it was last year, and I spent a few days with him anyway. And sort of every morning, I was walking down the hill to the training ground with him, and then walking back, building this piece, and there was not an empty second in our walk. It's exhausting spending time with him, and I mean that in a nice way. And as I say, I have a huge amount of affection for him. But he would be asking me questions. He'd be setting me little tests. He'd be talking. He'd be, there's no wasted moment. I know Isaac Hayden well at Newcastle, and he talked about, it's that sort of stereotype Rafa story. But they lived in the same apartment block in Jesmond for a while in Newcastle, and it was bumping into him. Isaac was coming back with a takeaway or whatever, and he bumps into Rafa, who's on his way back from the training ground, and he's just standing there for half an hour, and they're talking football, and Isaac's takeaway is getting cold. He's like, oh, come on, Gaffer, please. But that's what he's like. And a lot of the players that work with him don't realise what they've got until he's gone. And Isaac has said that to me on a number of occasions, because he's so intense. He is so intense. There's no let up, and it's one game is gone and it's on to the next one. And I think sometimes they feel they almost can't breathe. But when he's gone, they realise how much they've been improved as a player. It's sort of interesting to remember what he walked into at Newcastle, which was a very fractured club, a very, very fractured club. And he arrived talking about history and potential and stature, which was quite romantic, actually. And it had the effect of reminding Newcastle fans to look up and to think about their team in those terms, which they hadn't done for a long, long time. And for as long as he was there, people were able to buy into Newcastle, the idea of Newcastle, the idea that they were part of the club again and part of something special and something meaningful. And when he left, it was like a balloon bursting. And so he represented something very, very different at Newcastle, and something very important and very special. And I always say the best thing that Rafa did was give Newcastle hope. The worst thing Rafa did was give Newcastle hope.
George, you mentioned the intensity. Greg writes about how Rafa, despite living on Merseyside for so many years, wouldn't know what the best restaurant is. I think Carlo, in a relatively short time, maybe even one night or weekend, would have known that. He also was given the keys to the stadium in Naples when he was Napoli manager, because he was spending so much time between there and the hotel next to the stadium. As an impartial outsider, I think it's an outstanding appointment. And so, Greg, let's finish by maybe bringing us back to the football and an in-tray that is bulging when Rafa turns up at Finch Farm on Monday. There's recruitment decisions. There's going to be some players that you write about and Paddy writes about that really could flourish under his leadership, and others maybe not so much. So there's a lot to do there, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a lot to do. I think his appointment, his arrival, is good news for young players who have got sort of added value that you can be coached into them, like Dominic Calvert-Lewin and Ben Godfrey, who was sensational last season. I think it's possibly not so good news for players like James Rodriguez. I know Benitez wouldn't cut his nose off to spite his face if he thought he was going to be, and of course he's got another year in his contract at Everton, and if Benitez thought he could use him and get performance out of him, I'm sure he would. But I fear with his injury record and with noises already emanating from his camp that he may want to follow Ancelotti away from Goodison Park, that he might have that across his desk early doors. Richarlison as well, been a very, very important player for Everton. Had to be persuaded last summer by Ancelotti to give them one more year. So I think his future will come on after the Copa America. His future will be on the agenda again. Will he stay? Will he go to Champions League club? They still need a right back. Marcel Brands couldn't be there at the unveiling yesterday because he was in Holland, having been over there to do some business. And there's persistent talk about players like Denzel Dumfries at PSV, did so well for Holland at the Euros. So there's a lot of decisions to make. This is a team that has got some strong elements, but does lack depth and lacks pace and energy. And Rafa knows that. Like we said, he's done a full squad audit before he'd even probably had the first Zoom chat with the board, actually. So he'll know what they lack. He'll have his ideas about what they need. And no doubt he'll have about 50 targets per position. And this is where it gets interesting, seeing how he works with Brands, seeing how he works with Mr. Mashiri, so on and so forth. And I'm sure that he won't waste any time getting the relevant calls in. But it's going to be, like you say, not just the players that he can improve and work with. It'll be the players that might look at his arrival and think it's time to move on.
Greg, George, an absolutely fascinating chat. You, Greg, especially, are not going to be quiet over the coming 3 years if it goes that far and potentially beyond. Thank you very much indeed. This is certainly not going to be dull. Hello, I'm David Ornstein, and I'm here to tell you what The Athletic has planned across its podcast network during the Euros. You can catch me alongside Mark Chapman and a range of other Athletic writers on the England show throughout the tournament, bringing you the very latest news and insight from the England camp every single day. Prior to the big kickoff, we're releasing an 8-part documentary series telling the stories of the past 8 tournaments, starting with the sounds and smells of Euro 88 and finishing in 2016. There'll also be nightly episodes of the Totally Football Show, 9 zonal marking podcasts from Michael Cox's tactics and analytics team, and Adam Hurrey's Football Clichés will take a look at the competition's alternative storylines. So, with what felt like a never-ending domestic season finally behind us, we've got all of your Euro 2020 needs covered. Check out every show for free wherever you get your podcasts.